Our monthly gathering today features the first graduate of the Clergy Project, which is a program for pastors. Well, pastors who are actually secretly atheists but have not publicly revealed that yet. So Jerry was initially one of the members of that. Then he came out publicly as an atheist, left the ministry behind, and he's now the author of the new book, Hope After Faith, and the Ex-Pastor's Journey from Belief to Atheism. Jerry is a former Pentecostal minister of 2 evangelical churches in Deridder, Louisiana. He came out publicly as an atheist in 2011, and he went on to become executive director of Recovering from Religion, which is a program for those who are transitioning out of the world of religion. And now he has released his first book. His story has been covered by several national media outlets, including the New York Times, CNN, and NPR. So please welcome our guest speaker today, Jerry DeWitt.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Well, we all made it. Filled the house up. Thank you for that. I'm going to take full credit for all of you being here. Even though it is a monthly meeting and probably has more to do with fellowshipping with all of your brothers and sisters. Can I get away with that?
Amen. Amen.
Amen. Oh, we're off to a good start. Off to a very good start. I love being in the South. I travel other parts of the country and I'll think that it's made its way everywhere, and I'll end what I think is a very powerful and poignant phrase by "Can I get a Darwin?" and some of these Northeasterners look at me, you know, like the dog does when it hears something strange. You know? And so it's spreading. It's getting there. People actually are now making T-shirts with that on it, if you can believe that or not. Can I get a Darwin? What a silly world we live in, isn't it? And it feels like a silly world whenever I get introduced the way that I was just introduced and realize that this story is getting national attention. And I don't consider it my story. I'm thrilled to, be in all the pictures. And because I love looking at myself, and I'm thrilled to see my name in print or wherever else, because I've just got an ego as big as Texas. But I don't consider it my story. The main reason that I'm thrilled is because there are so many people just like me, men and women, not just throughout the country, but throughout the world, that have truly graduated from their religion. If you know anything about me, you'll know that I don't like the phrase "lost my faith," because it sounds as if I've misplaced something valuable. Like I lost my keys or, something like that, or I lost my house. I don't feel like I've lost anything valuable. As a matter of fact, just a couple of weeks ago, for the first time, now imagine this. This is how upside down of a world we live in. My story has been in the New York Times twice. Only after the second time that it was in the New York Times did my local paper do an article on me. We only have 10,000 people in our town. What the hell are all those other people doing more important? I don't understand how they were filling their pages. But finally, after being in the New York Times for the second time, they wrote a story on me. And it was wonderful because the reporter gave me an opportunity to express my story my way and to really try to show love, very sincere love, to the community that doesn't know what to do with me. And in either they've rejected me or they are ignoring me. And I much prefer the rejection than ignoring. But nevertheless, I was able to tell my story and to try to express on behalf of so many men and women, not just throughout the country, but the world, that find themselves in a situation such as mine. Not having lost faith, but having graduated from religion. I see my quote-unquote spiritual journey as a test of integrity. I feel like it was a personal test. All along the way, I was tested to see what I would do. My conscience was testing me. I started off in a very, very staunch Pentecostal form of Christianity. How many of you are familiar with Pentecostals? I should get some Darwins today. Unless they traumatized you, then you're going to hate me, and I'm sorry. I get that as well. But I started off in a very, very strict form of Pentecostalism where the men were not allowed to have facial hair. So I know this isn't pretty. It's just an act of rebellion and self-expression. And the women were not allowed to cut their hair. One of my friends was reminding me of a case that I've heard of multiple times where young ladies back in the day in the Pentecostal world, when they were not allowed to cut their hair, I know this is going to sound like I'm making this up, but I promise you this is true. They would put their damp hair in the freezer. They would take their hair, they would wet it, they would put it in the freezer, shut the door, and stand there for as long as it took for that hair to freeze. Does anybody know why? So they could break it off, because Pentecost said you can't cut it, but Jesus didn't include you can't break it. The Apostle Paul didn't think about that, probably because there was no refrigeration. Or maybe it would have been added. But to give you a brief, clear understanding of how difficult this type of theology is, one summer, I don't know how familiar you are with youth groups and how they age out. You know, you start off and it seems like you've got a whole bunch of middle-aged schoolers, and then all of a sudden they're all teenagers. Suddenly overnight, the whole youth group is teenagers. And so they all begin to come into maturity at the same time, which was kind of cool for me because I was a teenager too, so it was a great time to be in that church. And so all of a sudden, all of the young ladies begin to desire the attention of the young men in the church. But the rules are very strict. They can't wear makeup. They can't cut their hair. That limits their style. There's a lot of things they can't do that all the other young ladies were allowed to do to attract the attention of the young men. So they had to do it their own way. Well, obviously, they all had to wear dresses. So suddenly, to my glee, a trend started of the young ladies wearing shorter and shorter dresses. Our pastor, of course, did not approve. And so he began to preach messages that the dresses had to be below the knee. So that was fine. Given enough time, human nature began to find a loophole. Yes, the dresses came back down below the knee, but they became so tight that you could see their underwear underneath their blue jean skirts. So now the message is modified. Not only does it have to be below the knee, but it cannot be tight. Given human nature a little longer to evolve, suddenly the dresses were below the knee, no longer tight, but split all the way up to the knee. And so now the pastor's modified his message yet again, and I felt sorry for him, to be honest with you, every week having to adjust. So now it has to be below the knee, it cannot be tight, and no splits allowed. Well, it took a little while, but finally a new fashion style evolved within Pentecostalism: bows. And I kid you not, some young ladies would walk in with bows so big that I thought if the wind caught it, it would break their neck. Because human nature is human nature. And the reason that I'm here today, and the reason that I've written this book, Hope After Faith, is because I believe, and that's a word I use cautiously nowadays, but I believe that I was sincere. I believe I was sincere. I believe I was as devout as any Christian who has ever lived on the planet. I believe that I was just as saved as anyone was ever saved. I believe that my experience that I detail in this book proves conclusively that I wasn't playing around. But in the background, human nature was having its way. No, it wasn't causing me to wear short skirts, so don't go looking over the internet for that. But what it was doing was it was creating within me a desire for truth. I don't know if you've seen a couple of the news clips that are out there now, like on MSNBC on Morning Joe. I was on there a few weeks ago, and it was, it's pretty obviously a setup. They felt like it might give them a little bump in ratings to have this author or this controversial subject, and obviously it did my publicist well to have the book mentioned. But it was a setup from the very beginning. Joe made sure that everyone out there knew that Jesus was real, that atheists were hopeless, and that he was a devout believer before he hardly even introduced me. But I thought the night before, that sleepless night before, I thought, how can I condense this? Because everyone asked, how did this happen? What was the situation? Who backed over your dog? What did God not do for you? Did you not win the lottery? Was you born with one short leg? Why do you hate God? All the rest of us can love Him so easily. Why do you hate Him? That has to be the only reason that you would proclaim yourself an atheist now, is because you're rebelling and you're hating God in some form or fashion. And so knowing who the other guest was going to be and being able to predict which direction the interview was going to go, I thought, I think I finally have my answer. A very simple answer to how this happened and why this happened. And the answer was love. Love is why I'm an atheist. Love is why I changed my Facebook page, now almost 2 years ago or so, to Secular Humanist. Because it was love. It was a love for God, it was a love for truth, and it was a love for other human beings that caused me, over 25 years, to graduate from my religion. So today I'm very thankful that my form of human nature, it didn't put me in short skirts or make me wear a bow, but instead it drove me deeper and deeper into my love for humanity. That's where I could say, can I get a Darwin? Thank you. So, the obvious question, and it's the one I want to address very briefly, and then I want to take as much time as is allowed for questions and answers, is why in the world am I staying in my town? How long ago did y'all invite me to move to Houston? It feels like it's been 50 years ago now.
2011 October, I think.
Yeah, that's right. I think 2011 October. Somewhere around there, I started getting wonderful offers from beautiful people, not just in Houston, but all across the country, even in other countries, for me to move. And the question always comes up, why would you stay there? They don't like you. They don't want you. Why would you stay there? So, I'm going to peddle my book, and at the same time attempt to answer that question. If you've memorized these particular pages, I'll probably read it differently than it is on the page, just to not bore you and to, just have a little fun with it. So the thing to keep in mind as I begin this short reading is that by now, I've already had this cult experience in Des Moines, Iowa. I was so in love with truth, I began to see that there were scriptural evidences within the Bible supporting predestination. Did you know that's in there? About elect, God chooses some and doesn't choose others. And it took me quite a while, but I finally found some fellow tongue talkers that also believed in predestination. Usually that business model doesn't mix very well, but they do exist. And they were 1,000 miles from home in Des Moines, Iowa. And so my wife and I, with our 3-year-old son, we moved. We literally sold and then gave away everything that we possessed. Packed what little bit of clothes and blankets and baby supplies that we had left to our name into a white Ford Explorer whose air conditioner didn't work, whose windows no longer rolled down. And not only that, those little sensors on the sliding door that tells the rest of the car that the door is shut were wore out, so every bump set off an alarm. It was a great 1,000-mile trip, I can tell you. But we sold everything we had, and we moved to Des Moines in order to find the truth, in order to find people who understood the Bible clearly and specifically, were Pentecostal and also believed in these other doctrines. And it was a horrible failure. We quickly realized that we had joined a cult. I say quickly, it took us 8 months to get out. And usually whenever I say it took me 25 years to graduate from my religion, someone from the audience yells, "You're a slow learner." It took us 8 months to get out, and we literally fled while everyone else was held up in a convention at the mother church. But we've come back to Louisiana, and everything about my life is shaken. My confidence in the Bible is completely destroyed. My hopes and dreams of finding people that loved God the way that I thought we should all love God and who believed the truth about the Bible, all of those things had slipped away. So I'd taken a job selling life insurance. It's a good thing for a preacher to do, right? How many know life insurance selling preachers, right? Or car salesmen. You know any preaching car salesmen? I'm such a horrible salesman. You'd think I'd made a living all this time, but I haven't. So I'm sitting at Liberty Life. So I pick up in the reading at, "But I was not ready to leave my faith behind. And soon a pastor with the larger-than-life force of Brother Goodwin, the cult leader whom we just left, came into my life. One afternoon, I was sitting at my metal office desk in Liberty Life, filling out paperwork, when the back door swung open, and I heard one of the sales agents yell, "Brother Glass!" Without turning around, I knew exactly who the salesman was referring to, George Glass, Jr., who once served as the pastor of the First United Pentecostal Church, one of the largest Pentecostal churches in the Deridder area. Brother Glass was a second-generation preacher. His father, George Glass Sr., was such a beloved pastor that he was known simply as Papa George. When I was growing up, Brother Glass's ministry had become so massive that it inspired profound resentment in Deridder's close-knit Pentecostal community. The sentiment among Pentecostals was, surely he can't get that popular if he was really preaching God's Word. That Brother Glass preached a liberal version of Pentecostalism only intensified suspicions about him and his ministry. Unfortunately for Brother Glass, his enemies were rewarded when he became ensnared in an extramarital affair and had to leave his pastorship at First United Pentecostal Church. So when Brother Glass walked into Liberty Life that day, to me, he was little more than an infamous character who represented all of the failures of a liberal, watered-down brand of Pentecostalism. I may have had a little ego. I'm not sure. I was so suspicious of Brother Glass that I didn't even acknowledge him. A difficult thing to do because he was such a big and gentle presence. He was tall, with a wide smile and an endearing round face. He was just everybody's pawpaw. One of Liberty Life's salesmen, Steve, who had a freckled face and brown reddish hair and a shit-eating grin all the time because he constantly cracked dumb, smart-aleckly jokes, greeted Brother Glass at the back door. He then brought Brother Glass to his desk, which was just behind my own, pulled open the desk drawer, and very exuberantly raised a snap-on tool. Everybody knows snap-on tools? Is that a Texas thing? Snap-on tool coffee mug featuring cheesy images of women in scant bikinis. Still remember it to this day. Brother Glass, Steve said with a childish giggle, "What do you think of my coffee cup?" So you can imagine this scenario playing out in your workplace. "Brother Glass, what do you think of my coffee cup?" I couldn't stand Steve's crude humor, but this seemed like a wonderful, ballsy jab at the once adulterous Brother Glass. But without missing a beat, in the most beautiful, lilting, southern drawl that sounded like John Wayne transformed into a poetic preacher, Brother Glass replied, "Son, when you look at that mug, all you see is flesh. But when I look at that mug, all I see is souls." At that moment, I fell head over heels in love with Brother Glass. If he had ordered me to raise from my desk and run outside to the parking lot to wash his car, I would have done it in a heartbeat. Brother Glass's response to Steve's sexist coffee mug that displayed women like wares for purchase was a pure, unadulterated expression of humanity. Ministers like Brother Robertson and Brother Thibodeau, others that I'd sit under, were endearing men, but I'd never met anyone who handled humanity with such grace and so cleverly. What have people been telling me all along about Brother Glass? I thought, this guy's a freaking genius. I'm going to close there for that. But the reason that I bring that up is, as I go on the story, I begin to explain that Brother Glass became hated and disdained within his community. Even though he really sat on top of a very, very popular and powerful ministry. He was second generation. Papa George, let me give you one quick story. Papa George, by the time that I came into Pentecostalism, was already elderly and was sitting as the pastor emeritus in this large Pentecostal church that Brother Glass was pastoring. And they had an evangelist, wonderful, wonderful evangelist by the name of Terry Creekmore. And Terry Creekmore was everything that I ever wished that I was. He was tall and slender, beautiful dark hair, had a vocabulary like a library. and could preach, I'm telling you, preach up a storm. And one night he was preaching this message called Mountain Climbing Pentecostals. And First UPC was such a large church that it had this giant balcony with 2 large staircases going up. And Brother Creekmore would run up and down those stairs. I had no idea how he had the stamina, but he was running to the top of the mountain and running back down, and running to the top of the mountain, mountain climbing Pentecostals. And he got to the part of his story where Elijah the prophet had gotten very discouraged and was sitting under the juniper tree. How many know this Bible story? Anybody? Sitting under the juniper tree, feeling sorry for himself because he was the only prophet in the land that was truly obeying and loving God. And so, Brother Creekmore called Papa George out from the front row. Papa George sitting there in his elderly state, very regal, solid gray hair, beautiful gray suit, elegant man. But when Brother Creekmore, this evangelist, this interloper, if you will, reaches out for the pastor emeritus and asks him to step out of the congregation, you could feel the tension begin to build. How dare you address Papa George? Not only did he ask him to stand up, he walked him to the steps going up to the platform with the pulpit just behind him and had elderly Brother Glass sit on the steps. All kind of Kiowa-wise, sitting on steps. Brother Creekmore pulled over a potted plant that was next to the pulpit, plucked off a fake plastic leaf out of the potted plant, and stuck it into Papa George's hair. And the place was dead. Much like it is right now. People were horrified that someone would touch Papa George, that they would mess up his hair, that they would put this piece of plastic in his fro. But they had done it. And Papa George gave a beautiful big smile, raised his hand and said a hallelujah, and it gave the congregation permission to be okay with what was going on. That was the type of ministry that Brother Glass had inherited. That was the type of love. That was the type of respect that he had inherited in this community. And this episode of adultery had so diminished that episode that he had gone to selling life insurance and was no longer welcome in the community. But instead of taking what I'm sure were many offers of other places to live, he stayed in Deridder. And he stayed his same loving self. And even though he had been beat down, had been humbled, had been embarrassed, when he walked through the back door of Liberty Life, he showed so much love and so much humanity that when that expression of humanity intersected with my life, it pushed me one step closer to reality. Because that's the power of love. And that's the power of community. And as I watched this man rebuild his reputation within that community, I didn't know it then, but I now understand it very clearly. What I was watching a methodology. I was watching a strategy, if you will, of how humanists, how new non-believers can stay and work within their community, expressing love, showing a true and natural desire for humanity in such a way that it wins back their family and their friends and their community. That's why I stay in Deridder. I stay in Deridder because if George Glass Jr. could stay in Deridder, then I can stay in Deridder. I stay in Deridder because that one example of love pushed me one step further to graduating from my religion. Now, what's neat about who I call senior pastor, Brother Glass, George Glass Jr., is that if we were able to get completely away from everyone else in the community, if we were able to assure each other that no one would ever repeat or know anything of our conversation, there's no doubt in my mind that he would be proud of where I am, who I am, and that I stayed where I belong. Can I get a Darwin? So my answer of why I stay in Deridder is because George Glass Jr. stayed in Deridder. Already I've seen the evidence at work. A couple of months ago I was in a little grocery store. Well, they're out of Texas. Brookshire Brothers. Y'all got Brookshire Brothers? Yeah. I was on the frozen food aisle at Brookshire Brothers and saw a school friend that I'd not seen probably in 20 years. And like all of you experience, whenever word starts getting out about your sudden change, like I've had plastic surgery or something, your sudden change, when I saw this person, I felt that small little sick feeling in the pit of my stomach. Not exactly sure what would be next. Not really sure where the conversation would go. Does anybody else experience that? And so, I stood my ground. I held on more tightly to my buggy. And we began to talk. And I began to feel the anxiety kind of fade off of me, almost like you're drying off after a shower. I could feel the anxiety evaporating because the conversation's going well. Have you seen this person? Have you seen that person since we graduated? Have you kept up with this one? Have you kept up with that one? And I'm getting more and more comfortable. And no, I haven't seen any of those sorry people. I don't know where they've gone. I hated them then, I hate them now. No, it's this, it's that. And the conversation's going and going and going. And then all of a sudden, he says, "What are you doing nowadays?" And I chickened out. And I said, I'm a motivational speaker.
Darwin.
And I saw his eyes dilate. And he says, yes. He said, that's right. The other night, my wife and I watched one of your presentations online. And it was back. He leaned over the buggy to get as close to me as he could. And he said, and we really liked it. That's a George Glass Jr. moment. That's why staying in town when you can pays off. Go to your Christmas banquet. Go to your Thanksgiving dinner. Go to your reunions. Unless people in your family are completely, totally nuts, and if they are, you already know it, and you know you should avoid them regardless. Go and be yourself and love these people into reality. Confuse the hell out of them. You don't have to approach this subject at first. Just love them in every way possible and be your natural self and, give them $5 for gas if they need it and compliment them on their ugly dress or whatever it is you need to do. To be yourself, be the best humanist you can be, and let them find out about the real you second-handed. Let them find out from some other direction so it creates this huge amount of confusion. Because what George Lee Glass did for me was he confused the hell out of me. Because that's not who he was supposed to be. And that's not how he was supposed to act. And that's not what I'd been taught. And that's not what I'd heard all my life. Suddenly, there was new information that had to be processed. And you are those walking humanistic data banks of new information, walking into people's lives, showing love, showing integrity, being a humanist, causing confusion, making people reevaluate the myths and the lies that they've heard all their lives. Can I get one last Darwin? Darwin. Thank you. I don't know how long that was or how long it's supposed to be, but Vic, you let me know what we need to do now. Want me to read a couple of chapters? No.
We have the room until 3.
We have the room till 3. Oh, well, we're just getting started. So is there any questions?
I got one. Can you explain tongues?
Can I explain speaking in tongues?
Where does it come from?
Okay, I cannot tell you where it truly originated, but it's been around obviously for a very, very, very long time. Not just within the Christian experience. Okay, that was one of the first things that really messed with my mind, because when I found out that witch doctors in the deepest parts of Africa are known to also speak in tongues, I was like, what? Wait a minute, how does this work? Because you should ask yourself the question: if they speak in tongues and we speak in tongues and they believe in this other God and I believe, how do we know what's the, and so that was a real situation. By and large, my explanation of speaking in other tongues is that it is something that we learn in the environment. Okay, you walk in. Obviously, if you know anything about the Pentecostal history, it's been around since the turn of the 20th century. Early 1900s, 1901, Azusa Street Revival broke out in Los Angeles, California. There was a little bit before that, but that's where true Pentecostalism started. And the reason it's referred to as Pentecostalism is because in the book of Acts, the Acts of the Apostle, chapter 2, it says, on the day of Pentecost, they were all in one place and in one accord. And suddenly there came a sound from heaven as of a mighty rushing wind, and it filled all the house where they were sitting, and there appeared unto them cloven tongues like as of fire. Okay? And so people who begin to have this experience of speaking in other tongues reference back to the day of Pentecost. So that was another letdown, because the day of Pentecost simply means the 50th day, right? And so I thought, we're all calling ourselves 50th day? That doesn't make any sense. That's weird. So it's learned behavior from being in the environment where it's happening. They're subconsciously, you're picking up patterns. One of the games that Pentecostal children will play, they will play a form of charades where you have to guess who they're mimicking. All right? Because in the church services, almost every person falls into a pattern of how they're going to worship, how they're going to speak in other tongues, how they're going to raise their hands, how they're going to shout hallelujah. There are certain patterns that become very easy to spot. And so, in the backs of Sunday school rooms, when there's no adult supervision, kids will mimic brother and sister so-and-so and see if they can do it well enough for you to guess who they're mimicking. And so it's just that easy for people to either intentionally or subconsciously pick up on these patterns. So it is obviously completely gibberish, and there's a lot of dynamics in play. I describe it like learning to dance, okay? Because when you first, or at least I would imagine, because I've never learned how to, but I would imagine when you first start learning how to dance, it's awkward. You're trying to figure out where your hands go, where your feet go, where your hips go. It's all there's a lot of consciousness to it. But the longer you do it, or maybe the drunker you get, I don't know, whatever the thing is, then of course all of it begins to feel natural. And obviously it's not completely natural. There's a new program that you've now written, and you're running that program subconsciously. Same thing happens with speaking in other tongues. At the very beginning, a person is very conscious about what they're saying and how they say it, unless they're in a church service that is so driven and filled with emotion that they let themselves go completely, and they're no longer concerned about whether it sounds right to other people. I was extremely relieved. I cannot tell you how relieved I was when my pastor, Brother Lloyd Jeans, our family pastor, heard me speak in tongues for the first time and gave his seal of approval. And it wasn't that he, stamped my forehead with a city seal or anything. It was that when he got back to the pulpit after being at the altar praying with us, he said, "I heard Brother DeWitt speak in tongues." And to me, that was the seal of approval. That meant, that I really, go ahead, one more.
When we were 11 years old, me and my sister went against our parents, and we went to the Pentecostal church next door to our Baptist church.
Oh, shame.
And they took my little sister on stage and rubbed oil on her head, and she collapsed and was flipping out all over the place.
Yeah.
To this day, she believes in God because of that.
Yes.
What caused her to do that?
Yeah.
I got her off the stage, and we ran out of the church, and I pretty much told them all, F you. But
Made you very popular.
it scared me so much that that's been in the back of my head forever.
Yeah.
And she still says there was something there that day. There was something more powerful than this.
So, exactly. So here is what I would consider to be a shame. a shame on us as human beings at this point in time in our culture and in our development of civilization. Our nervous system has the ability to produce so many more sensations, so many more states, so many more altered states without all of the fun stuff that some of you atheists enjoy. But yet we don't experience that because we're not creating an environment to experience that. You know, we live very mundane, repetitive lives where we feel the same sensations over and over and over again. But in other cultures, it's completely different. And so, in my experience, what I think happened, and this is just my opinion, she must have had a certain amount, even the tiniest inkling of expectations. Okay.
Right.
And so when she got up there, all of that emotion and all of that expectation, it does overwhelm, and it does cause you to feel things. Now, here's the thing about Pentecostalism. Pentecostalism in particular is feeling driven. And so the doctrine is though it's a very, can be a very limiting lifestyle, the doctrine's really simple. And so you can fulfill the doctrine and go through the initiation process very, very quickly. You can do it all in one night and come back dressed right the next weekend. Okay, I mean, there's nothing complicated about it. What you begin to live off of as a Pentecostal is the next service. Because you have this service and the music is just right and the preaching is just right and you feel all of the feelings that you want to feel. You feel the sense of euphoria, all of the serotonins, everything, all the brain chemicals do the things that they do to make you enjoy yourself. You come down off of it. You can't even remember what the poor preacher preached, which constantly pissed me off. Constantly, to call somebody up and say, "What do you think about the message?" Just 2 days later, it was good. It was maybe not one of your best. I'd be like, "Well, which scripture spoke to you the most?" When Sister Martha began to dance, that was kind of the scripture that spoke to me. And it'd be so frustrating because you'd spent so long, trying to have something worthwhile for them. But, so, it's about the next high, and the next high, and the next high, and the next high. Now, a lot of people, some people that I've ran into in the secular movement say, "See there, Jerry, that's why you shouldn't preach. Because it's all about emotionalism. See there, that's why you shouldn't have music, and you shouldn't this, and you shouldn't that." I think we're smart enough to find a balance. I think we're smart enough. I think everybody in here, no matter how dynamic and beautiful and awesome I would be, I doubt that we could get so excited that you would all become my cult members. If so, let's try it. No. Yeah, so that's the problem. Emotion. We got one gentleman back here.
Yeah, Jerry. First of all, I got 3 questions.
Okay. I got 3 answers.
Okay, good.
Or 4.
All right, and then I'd like to acknowledge that I certainly am so appreciative of the fact that you have demonstrated this courage to walk away from what I consider a very harmful institution. My questions are, first, I think in one of your interviews you talked about you were fired from a job because of this. So could you touch on that a little bit?
Certainly.
The other thing would be, what are you doing in the community now in regards to promoting secularism or humanism?
My town community?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
All right.
And then the other thing I want you to address is, one of the things that I'm seeing is this aspect of what could be an avalanche of this secular movement, that more people like yourself are moving out of ministry, pastorship, into secularism.
Right.
And one of the things about that's of interest to me is you got to replace that income.
Yes.
Okay? So the idea of moving away from your means of making a living,
Right.
now you're into another area where you're going to have to do something else.
Right.
What is going to be that approach, and what do you suggest to us in terms of how we receive these type of individuals?
Right.
And then what are you going to say to other pastors and ministers in terms of their attitude, in terms of their preparation to move out of this?
That's great.
Because one of the things about this, what I know, is that the idea of the church and how it responds and gives to pastors, I don't think you're going to find that in the secular community.
Right. I can tell you for a fact you're not.
So it has to be a concern.
Right.
And so I'd certainly like to hear your perspective about how to deal with
Sure.
it.
Okay, so let me jump to the second question first about what I'm doing in my town, and then because the other two lead to each other. You know, I've been trying to figure it out what I'm going to do in my town, and so what I did was I'm now a celebrant through the American Humanist Association or the Humanist Society. So I'm now a secular minister. That word celebrant's a really funky word, isn't it? You know, but secular minister through them. And my intentions are I've already contacted the courthouse in our parish. My town is only 10,000 people. Our parish, which y'all know, y'all have counties, we have parishes. Our parish is only 40,000 people. I mean, this is a small place, and it's one of the bigger land masses within the state or jurisdictions. And so I've already contacted the clerk of court, found out what I need to do in order to be recognized again within my community as a secular minister. So that's already been its own level of fun, you know. And it's so crazy how people want to deal with things, because he says, well, let me look into it, you know, and I was like, well, here we go, you know. And so he comes back and he says, I'll tell you what, it's kind of complicated. We don't really know what to do with it. So you just bring your paperwork in, show where, you know, the Humanist Society has certified you. We'll put it on file. And, you know, it's kind of like don't ask, don't tell, you know. And I'm like, well, that's all fine and good until a lawyer gets involved somewhere, you know, and some poor couple hadn't been married for 30 years, you know. So we need it to be a little more substantial than that. So my intentions within the community, locally, just where I live, is to go ahead and get recognized again as a minister, but as a secular minister, and to rejoin the Ministerial Alliance. That may be a little difficult since one of the main guys, his church is on the front of my church, in my book, but, you know, that's the intentions. Is to be recognized that there is a form of ministry that is completely secular, that has absolutely no dependence whatsoever on supernaturalism. And that's what I want to do locally. Now, some people would consider this locally because y'all drive an hour just to get across town. An hour from my house, south, in Lake Charles, Louisiana, I've been asked to start a secular congregation. And so we have now founded the...
Hallelujah!
Amen! Woo! I promise you don't want to get me started. We'll need longer than 3 o'clock. Community Mission Chapel has already been founded. We had our coming out service in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, which is, as you know, the state capital. So, because we wanted everybody to know where we were at. The next Monday morning, we had it Sunday. Monday morning, we were in the New York Times, you know, with our service. Isn't that pretty cool? So, but the actual church home is going to be in Lake Charles. So that's what I'm doing, trying to spread the word with that. And we're being very, very careful with it. What we're trying to do, and it may sound like we're accommodating, but what our goal is that if a spiritualist, supernaturalist, religionist comes into the congregation, if they leave offended, we want that to only be because of what they didn't hear or what we didn't do. That's our goal. But we want it to be completely devoid of all forms of supernaturalism. We're just going to enjoy life. You know, that's it. So that's the long question. The other question is this, is about getting fired from a secular job. The reason I had a secular job in the first place is because, and this gets me in a little bit of trouble sometimes, when I realized that I was so out of sync with my congregations that I was hindering their progress. Okay, that's the part that gets me in trouble, is a lot of secular people would say, hinder their progress, turn it upside down, burn the building down, you know, do whatever. That wasn't me. That wasn't my heart. These people had invested their lives, their money, all right, into these churches, and I felt like just because I was the pastor, I didn't feel like I had the right to get up and turn the whole thing upside down. You know, I felt like they had a mission. I was going a different direction. I bowed out very silently and gently without telling them all the reasons why. I actually lied about why I was leaving. I'd taken a secular job back at City Hall. I've got City Hall experience, and I said that was taking too much time, you know, so I've got to leave, and I also blamed it some on my wife's illness. So, the moment that we made the decision to leave that church, we doomed our finances. Because it was a little church, it didn't pay a whole lot, it paid about $3,000 a month, okay? But that was $3,000 a month we weren't going to have anymore. And for us and our meager income, that was huge. What I was getting at City Hall was not nearly enough to replace losing that $3,000 a month because we worked for a little town. So it immediately put us into financial jeopardy. I took another small little church that I thought was more liberal, much more progressive. Even the name of the church was First Community Church. And I was like, I'm all about community. This is going to work. Come to find out, there was a reason they no longer belonged to the Presbyterians of USA. I should have done a little more research. And it didn't work out either. Still beautiful, lovely people who love me, and I love them. They don't love me as much as I love them anymore. And I had to back out of that. So income was gone. So eventually, I took a secular job as a building inspector. I realized I had to leave City Hall because at City Hall, I was the preacher at City Hall. I was like the main pastor for Deridder because I worked at City Hall. And so I had to leave that to get away from this identity. Went to work for my best friend, worked for him for a year. Word started getting out about, my change, quote unquote, and he fired me. He said, "You will destroy my business." And he was right. He was right. His competitors would have used it against him that he had this out-and-out atheist working for him. So, what I tell people in the Clergy Project, and forgive me if this, goes against the grain, what I tell them is, don't do what I did. Don't do it. Do not do it. Now, I'm gonna slip something into your mind, and you just play with it till you see me next time. And you can either say, "Damn, you're the smartest guy I know," or you can say, "That's stupid. I don't accept that." But let me throw this out. As ministers, we are taught to sacrifice our lives. Now, I'm not talking about, ministries that are able to buy coliseums. Okay. All right. I'm talking about the day in, day out, 100 people or less ministers, and that's what the majority of America is made up with. The last time I looked at a statistic, over 70% of all churches in the U.S. had less than 100 folks. Okay, those people ain't doing it to get rich. All right. Now, what we're taught though in religion as ministers, and this flows over to lay members as well, especially in evangelical thinking, that you are to sacrifice your life for the cause. You're to sacrifice your time, you're to sacrifice your finances, you're to sacrifice your family. Everything is for the cause. The trap that non-believing ministers can fall into, because they so love the truth and they so love helping humanity, they can, unbeknownst to them, be just as religious about coming out as atheists and feel as if, just like I did, that they have to once again sacrifice everything for the greater cause. And I don't think that they should. I think that they have dedicated their life to people. They have paid a very, very severe price. I think they should take the time that is necessary to develop a financial strategy and a coming out strategy that will not only keep them from being broke financially, but will keep them from becoming broken emotionally or having a broken home. That's my take. That's how I feel about it. Does that answer most of it? So then, how do they make money? I don't know. I really don't. I mean, there are some people that are celebrants that have developed some good enough businesses. I don't know if they're making a living with it, but they do have an income from being a celebrant. If they're like Teresa, which has a great resume and has been able to work for a couple of different really wonderful organizations, that would be good, but obviously the movement's not big enough for every minister who's coming out. We've got almost 500 ministers in the Clergy Project.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I don't know what the method is. I can tell you for a fact it's not what I'm doing. What I'm doing won't work. The advance that I got on this book, I'm 2 months away from being just as broke as I was the day my best friend fired me, because I've put the money, once again, into trying to save the world. One of these days it'll save me back. Yes, sir.
2 questions, and then you may be able to answer both of them at the same time. The first one, I still haven't heard what changed your mind. What was the critical incident that's brought you over to the other side, the dark side? Maybe you didn't tell that because you're hoping we buy the book. And
Believe me, it's all over YouTube. Yeah.
the second part of the question is, you sound pretty intelligent. What took you that long?
Those are both very good and painful questions. Yeah, no, those are both good questions. Okay, so the first thing is is that there is no one incident. And that's what struggles, that's what people struggle with, is there is no one single incident. It was one layer after another of having to completely reverse engineer everything that I was raised up in, everything I was raised to believe. Literally, my earliest memories are with me laying my head in my grandmother's lap with a screaming earache, her pressing my head with a warm washcloth, praying and speaking in other tongues. That's some of my earliest memories. And so that wired my brain, and I had to unwire that. And it took quite a long time. And the reason that it took a long time, so there is no one incident, but the original catalyst was dealing with the subject of eternal punishment, dealing with hell, the very issue of hell. I was too much of a humanist to just swallow that and say, okay, everybody who doesn't look, act, or dress like me is going to burn in hell forever and ever. I couldn't swallow that. I had to get to the bottom of it, and in so doing, that began to expose the errors, the misinterpretations, the mistranslations of the Bible to me. And over a course of years, then eventually the Bible was out of the way, and I was left as just a pure spiritualist, where I didn't even need the Bible. I was so close to Jesus, I didn't need a book, all right, because I had an experience and a relationship, and it took time for that to, be undone. And so that may also explain why it took so long. I did not want to not believe. I never wanted to doubt. Doubting was a sin. Doubting was the failure. The way I describe it, it's as if someone gives you this beautiful gift, gives you a brand new car, and you're so excited that you've received this, and it's going to take you all over the country. It's a great, wonderful gift added to your life. But then they say, by the way, though, ever so often, the check engine light will come on. But when it does, just drive harder and faster. Don't pay attention to any of those signals. That's what you're subconsciously taught as an evangelical Christian in the United States and maybe the rest of the world, that if you doubt, if the check engine light comes on, then that's a signal you need to be more devout, you need to be more sincere, you need to try harder. Not that you need to question, but that you need to alleviate the questions. And I did not want to give up being a Christian, did not want to give up the ministry. Did not. If I'd known all of you were here for me to minister to, it might have been a little easier. Yes, sir.
I've been wanting to encounter someone like you had graduated, and this is the first opportunity. A couple years ago, out of curiosity, I purchased and read a textbook on the New Testament that's used in seminaries. And the question that I have for you is, how could you and other seminarians get through a study of the history of the New Testament?
Right.
How do you reconcile your beliefs to a scholarly approach
Right.
to the emergence of the New Testament canon?
That's a fantastic question. Three different answers to that. Number one, I came from a form of Pentecostalism that did not allow you to go to seminary, because seminary creates liberals.
Right in ignorance.
Right?
Exactly.
Right. I mean, that's really what it was that if you went to seminary, then you would come out a lukewarm believer. You'd never be a true believer. You'd be lukewarm. So seminary was out of the question. It was really just more, did you have the gift of gab? Could you get in the pulpit and make enough sense that people wouldn't, fire the pastor for letting you preach? But the next part of that is that you have to remember what has become a very thriving industry now, and it is that denominations have their own seminaries. And so they teach what they want the pastors to know. So unless the pastor who goes to, for instance, a strictly Pentecostal seminary, unless that pastor for some reason catches a clue and looks outside of his curriculum, then he's only going to learn the Pentecostal doctrine. The whole thing is going to be taught and framed in a way to support the denominational view. That's why they created their own seminaries, so that they didn't have to go to Harvard or go someplace that might make them liberal. The third thing is that many of the graduates from the Clergy Project, seminary is what messed them up. So you're right. I mean, it is effective. The issue that you have is that if while the young man or woman is in their 20s or so at seminary, and the right pieces click together, because there's an apologetic argument that's being made in the background the whole time anyway, okay? And so it really has a lot to do with where they're at in their life at that moment as to whether they even really catch this, or does the apologetics outweigh? Because they want it to outweigh. They need it to outweigh. And so this doesn't hook them. But if it does hook them and they're young in their ministry, say in their 20s, they immediately get out. They transfer, they use their credits for something else, and they're off, building computers. They do something else. If they're in their 30s, 40s, early 50s, whenever it finally catches up with them, they've been so in love with the ministry, maybe they're one of the people who are developing their own set of apologetics. And so they're fighting against this, but if they're in their 30s, 40s, 50s, when it finally settles in on them, now they're really in the trap. Because they've got mortgages. They've got children going to college. They've got spouses that are dependent upon health insurance. Suddenly their entire world is dependent upon this one thing, and they've invested all their time and energy in something that isn't that easy to transfer into another career. And so it really becomes a test of integrity, and so that's the hardest part. If they're in their late 50s, early 60s, by and large, they find a way to say, I think I might can handle this for a couple of more years. I think I can find a way to preach, love your neighbor as yourself for about 36 more months so I can draw my retirement. So it really depends on the stage of life. But you're exactly right. If people are truly learning exactly what you described, then it should and many times does make a difference. But see, the reason I feel like that I've come this direction is because I have these equal values of loving truth and loving humanity. Okay? There's some people in seminary that they find out the whole thing, or at least large portions of it, is hogwash, but their values aren't as equal. Okay? They don't value truth, and that may sound like I'm being derogatory, but I'm not. It's a personality difference. They don't value truth as much as they value humanity. And this is the only game in town for them. This is all that they know. And so they can think that the masses need the myth in order to survive the hardships of life, where the educated minister, their burden to bear is that they don't get to live with the myth. They may have to propagate it, but they don't get to enjoy it because it's this messed up way of loving people. They think it's like you're on the plane with your child, it's going to crash. Do you say, we're about to die? Or do you cover their ears and start singing a lullaby and say it's all going to be okay? And there's an act of love that is engaged in that. And it's one of the reasons I get so angry when people, are like, well, did you call everybody up you ever deceived? Did you? It's not like that. It's not that simple. But you're exactly right. I appreciate that. There's somebody over here that'll come over there. I believe it's you, sir.
I saw on a lunch break yesterday on my phone, there's a big thing going on right now with the U.S. military. I don't know if you've heard of this yet. I just picked up on it yesterday, but humanists want to have ordained ministers for their soldiers.
Right.
And this actually came out in big print as a picture, like, hey guys, you stink, or whatever, that you would see on Facebook. But basically it was, we need to fight against these people being able to do against atheists or secularism, them having their own preachers. And
Right.
so the military is kind of not really wanting to touch this at all. It was a big deal. I didn't know if you'd heard about it,
Yes.
but it was very interesting to me. I never really thought about that until I saw that yesterday. And I didn't get to read it in depth because I was on a short break from
Right.
my job. But it was pretty nasty what these people were doing. I mean, and I didn't know if maybe, these guys do need to be represented in the
Sure.
military. They die every day for
Absolutely.
as much as a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew
Yeah.
or whoever, they put their life on the line.
It is a real issue, and the argument that the legislators are trying to make just to please their religious constituents, they'll say things like, well, what are they going to say? What are they going to represent? Are they going to, just their presence there is telling this soldier that's dying on the battlefield that they're going to die and cease to exist. There's all of these very ignorant, rebuts.
Well, they're
to
fighting against letting
Yes.
atheists have their own
Yes.
preachers.
Yeah. There's this real. Exactly. And of course, all it is politics. because the legislators, they could care less. They're not out in the battlefield. All they're going to do is whatever it takes to get votes next time election comes around, and that's what it's going to take. And so what we're seeing, and this relates back to members of the Clergy Project as well, what we've always known, but is becoming evident in our generation of secularism, is that there are cultural elements that still exist and still feel necessary for some people, even when you remove supernaturalism. You still may want a fatherly type figure, or a person, a counselor, to be there during that hard time, even if you have absolutely no belief or confidence in anything supernatural. These are cultural means that have always existed and may always exist. So we don't, now the secular ministry movement that's going on, and of course y'all have got great examples of it here in Houston, it's not trying to take the movement a different direction or even to do something new. It's just recognizing that a need for a particular personality type exists. And where I get hit most often is by the personalities that don't want it. And they're like, you're screwing up the movement. I was alienated at church, and now I'm going to be alienated whenever I can. No, it's always going to be for people who need it and want it. And the other forms of secular ministry are still going to exist.
Right, and the thing that they said that was the biggest deal was the fact of how do we, the military saying, like, how do we get an atheist or a humanist ordained to be a minister?
Yeah.
That's what they're throwing. How do we do this? It's kind of like juggling a ball.
And
I
it's
don't
there.
understand, but in something that you had said earlier about you're changing to be a secular minister is what brought that up in my head.
And it's there.
How that can be taken care of, or maybe someday down the road you might be involved in trying to get that.
And there's lots. I mean, there's several ways that you can receive certification as a secular minister that is nationally and globally recognized. People who have worked with it for decades. Who was over here? Yes, sir.
Are there federal or state disincentives for leaving the ministry?
For leaving the ministry? Yeah, you could say there are. For instance, you have the parsonage benefit that exists. So whenever I became senior pastor the very first time, some of the deacons, trustees took me to the church CPA, the CPA that the church had been using for some time, and actually that many churches in our fellowship had been using. And so what he did was he asked the board, how much are you going to pay Brother DeWitt? And they said such and such. And he said, okay. And he said, Brother DeWitt, how much is your house note? And I said, such and such. And he said, okay. And he says, your utility bill, such and such, your insurance, such and such. All right. And so he figured all that up. And it was a large portion of what I was going to be paid from the church. All of that instantly became tax deductible. All of that was tax-free. All of that was tax-free because it was a benefit coming from the church. So what they would do is they would write me 2 checks. So my salary was busted into 2 pieces. One was straight up salary that I owed taxes for, that I had to account for. The other, and the majority of it, simply said parsonage on it. Parsonage expense that I didn't have to show in any way whatsoever. So, that makes a difference. That makes a very big difference. And so much of what you do in your day in and day out responsibilities are tax deductible. You're a private business owner basically. And so there's a lot of incentives to be in the ministry.
I just had a curiosity about, what do you think very devout Christians mean when they say, I have a personal relationship with God or with Jesus or something? I can't wrap my head around that.
Yeah, they mean exactly what they're saying, unless they, there's a lingo, of course, that exists within all religions. And so you have Christianese, and people can say things out of habit, and they can say things because they're expected to say them. You see that as well. But when they say they have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, that is what they mean, and that is what they believe. And what is happening is Christian theology says that the believer has the presence of God via the Holy Spirit dwelling within them. Okay, well, obviously we know that there's no good vacuous place within us. We don't have a pocket down near our appendix, for the Holy Spirit to sit and hang out. So obviously it's going to be this other dimensional experience that plays out in the mind. So, when a devout Christian is praying and is very sincerely, earnestly asking for an answer, it is not uncommon for them to hear a voice, not necessarily audible, which I have heard, and that's another story all to its own, but to hear a voice inside their head that is such a strong impression. It's stronger than the normal rambling around that goes on in your head of like, will this red light ever change? I wish, did I feed the dog? Did I leave the coffee pot on? All of the stuff that Buddhists try to quieten down, right? It's louder than that. Suddenly it speaks through that like something coming out of a cloud. And because of what you've been taught, you believe that that is the Spirit of God inside of you that is speaking or directing or causing you to hear this voice or see these images. And so what it is, it's a very deep and intense love affair with your own imagination. Thank you. You can quote me on that. Thank you. I'll be here all night. Yes, sir.
Jerry, what do you think about with the rise of secularism and your leaving the ministry and about the future of Christianity? How long do you think it might?
Oh man, let me tell you.
As science continues to explain things that God used to explain, the gods have fewer and fewer places to hide.
Yeah, they definitely do. The problem is that they're tricky little devils. They can find little new niches. Think of this isn't obviously directed straight towards Christianity, but think of Deepak Chopra. And I love it. I'm not gonna kid you. I love his personality. I just find it so fascinating. But I love all kind of people. But think of his explanation of God and now quantum mechanics is an expression of divine nature, and so this thing just keeps rolling around and becomes what it needs to be. The only reason that I'm reluctant to really take a guess is because Thomas Paine thought it was over. He was writing his pamphlets sure that they wouldn't deteriorate before Christianity no longer existed. Obviously, we, just like you so rightly said, we have much more scientific advancement that can help us. If I had to prophesy, what I would prophesy is going to happen, and I think there's a lot of evidence for this, is that the world, and the U.S. in particular, will eventually tire of fundamentalism. The pendulum, it swings all throughout human history and all throughout religious history. I can't say that it won't come back, but eventually it will go. And what I think we're more likely to be left with is cultural Christians. Christians that are Christians just because that's what grandma was. We already know they exist. But Christians who will escape this evangelical demand that's upon our culture right now, and will be able to say, I don't really take any of that seriously, but I still put Christian down on the form at the emergency room
or
because
on my Facebook because everyone will reject
or on my
me.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons I think that isn't just because of how the secular movement is growing and the scientific understanding of the universe is growing, but also because historically the kids who leave religion do come back. A lot do come back. Okay, right now you've got the Pew poll that shows us that fewer and fewer of them are coming back, but they still come back. It's part of human nature for them to rebel against their parents, rebel against what their parents represent. But then when they become parents, they're like, oh, okay, it'd be kind of cool for somebody else watching my kids on Sunday morning. That's worth getting up for, And so they come back. But historically, they always come back more liberal than their parents. That's just part of Christianity. They keep watering it down to the point now that so many of the mega churches, and obviously there's exceptions to this, but so many of the mega churches are nothing but Tony Robbins rallies. Everybody know who Tony Robbins is? Yeah, motivational speaker, Anthony Robbins. Yeah, walking on coals. Now the mega churches are motivational speakers that have to lightly coat the motivational message, the self-help message, in just enough Christianese that they don't lose the more conservative people who are tithing in the pews. That's really, I think, what's going on. I mean, if you listen... Joel Osteen. I had to wait for somebody else to say it. You know, one of my favorites, honestly. I mean, if I was going to be a Christian minister, I would want to be Joel Osteen. For all kinds of reasons. You know, yeah, money, tall, good looking, big smile, you know. But just think about, this is, I'm going to go off tangent for just a minute because we still got a little time. Is it all right, Vic? We doing okay? If there's a next book, it'll probably be about AmeriGod. And the reason why is because I was driving through the desert forever ago now, it feels like, flipping through channels, and I come across Glenn Beck. And that's how tired and bored I was that I left it. And it was about the time whenever the administration was putting out some things about the health care bill, and the Catholic Church was losing its mind because of contraception. And Glenn Beck was on there, and he was saying, all God-fearing people have to fight this. All God-fearing people have to come against this. All God-fearing people got to do this, got to do that. And so that perked my interest, because then he started naming all these God-fearing people. And obviously he included Mormons, you know, because he is. Jehovah's Witnesses, Protestants, Catholics, Muslims. All of these people he lumped together under this one banner of God-fearing people. And I thought, when in history has there been a single God that all these people could worship? Because if you get really serious about your theology, if you're Protestant, Catholics are going to hell. And if you're Catholic, Protestants are going to hell. And if you're Baptist, Pentecostals are going to hell. And if you're Pentecostal, Baptists are going to hell, right? I mean, and there's no use even... Yeah, everybody else is going to hell. And there's no use mentioning Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses because that's obvious. Right? But suddenly, in the United States, on a very popular station with a very popular spokesperson for this particular brand of politics, suddenly he can get away with calling all of those different forms of religion under one God and say all God-fearing people. And that one God is AmeriGod. Because now religion is so watered down. We watch these fundies and we watch them, you know, shape policy and do these crazy things, and it scares us to death, and we think the whole thing's going to hell in a handbasket, right? Or over a wall, if you know anything about your Bible. And so we think that it's all bad, but in reality what's happening is they're getting more and more washed down and washed out every single day. To the point that Glenn Beck could get away with saying something like that. That he could say all these God-fearing people. Because there's no way they could worship the same God. So, what I think is transpiring with this is that in order to sell a product to an ever larger market, the product has to get more and more diffused, more and more confused, if you will. And I see that as a good thing. I see it as a really good thing, because you can't become fundamentalistic, you can't become a fundy, and also believe all those same people are going to heaven at the same time. You just can't do it. So that was a long drawn out thing, but you know how preachers are. Thank you. Let's see, was there somebody over here first? Let's see, I think, all right, go ahead, sir. Then I'll come over here.
I know it goes back, you know, preaching to all the nations and so forth and so on, but why is my refusal to surrender my mind interfere with their religious freedom?
Well, obviously it doesn't. You know, you and I know that it doesn't. But it's played out politically, because what has happened, this may sound very off subject, and I apologize, but what has happened is that Pentecostalism has developed into the charismatic movement, and the charismatic movement was so successful that it really has affected almost all branches of Christianity. Okay? And what's unique about the charismatic movement is that it directly relates back to the Axle Age, the beginning of how we perceive religion in our societies, in our culture, to where cosmic maintenance was expected. All right, there was a time that all religions were built around the idea of cosmic maintenance. You had to sacrifice the virgin, or the crops wouldn't grow. All right, you had to help God out. Cosmic maintenance, had to help God run the cosmos. And so the charismatic movement is really a replay of those themes, but they just use different terminologies, such as spiritual warfare. Okay, so in this idea of spiritual warfare, if you don't participate, if you don't come along and live godly, if you don't live a life of faith, if you don't live the way that modern day Christianity now thinks you're supposed to live, then what you're doing is you're opening a portal to the demonic realm. You are giving Satan control that he would not have otherwise if you were being obedient, if you were living for God. And so what happens is, and this is I kid you not, this is the way people think, is that you then will elect corrupt leaders. You will elect leaders that institute policies that kill babies. All right? And this will give Satan, all right, the prince of the air, who's over the principalities that rules the world, it will give him legal authority inside Houston, inside Texas, to manipulate and cause human suffering. Because obviously it comes to steal, kill, and destroy. All right? So, if they are able to convince every person to be a Christian, and thus every Christian to vote the right direction, they can put leaders in place that will develop policies, will put out policies that will cause people to live righteously, to live like God wants them to live. And if and only if the majority of people live the way God wants them to live, then God can bless that jurisdiction, bless Houston, bless Texas, right? And it will lessen poverty, it will bring down crime, it will relieve starvation, there'll be no more domestic abuse, everybody's baby will be born healthy, because God will then be able to work like He wants to work.
I thought he was omnipotent.
Yeah. So did the Apostle Paul, so did a lot of other people, but just not modern day Christians. They really don't. They truly feel like they're engaged in spiritual warfare. And they think, so many of them think, not the more liberal ones obviously, but so many of them think that President Obama has literally fallen, that the country voting for him has opened up the United States to the demonic realm, and that's the reason for all of our problems. That's the way people think. There was somebody, one more over here, and then we'll come back over there. Was it? Yes.
Yeah, thank you for coming, by the way. I would like to know what your opinion. Do you think that the world would be a better place without religion?
Would I think it would be a better place without religion? It depends on it depends on how you define religion, which is one of the serious problems I think the secular movement has. Some people in the secular movement consider what we're doing right now religion. One person standing up front and 100 people looking at it. Well, that's dumb. That's just my opinion. Sorry, YouTube. Some people think religion is if suddenly we passed a box because y'all were going to do something with some money somewhere, then that looks too much like church, and that's religion. There's all different types of definitions.
For me, I specify like the supernatural.
Yes. I believe the world would be better off without supernaturalism. Yes, absolutely. I believe the world would be better off without supernaturalism, and I think that the world would have been better off had it never existed. I don't know if we could have gotten to where we have gotten without it. I don't know what a role it's played in social gatherings, in social structures. Obviously there's a lot of people who understand that better than I do. But right now, if suddenly we completely stop believing in fairies worldwide, I think it would cause us to have to answer clearly questions we're not forced to ask right now. And once we're forced to ask those questions, we as a human species, we will find the answers. And when we find the answers, everyone will benefit from it. But it's supernaturalism that I would...
Do you think humanism can provide an alternative to when religion goes out of the world?
I think it does. I think it's already given an alternative. The problem that we have is twofold. One, their store's been in business a lot longer than our store, and we're still figuring out how to sell our goods. They're very good at it already, and so that intimidates us and makes us feel like we're not accomplishing really as much as we are accomplishing, and we really are. There's churches literally all over the world that are not going to would not have been able to add anything else to this meeting than what you've already had. I mean, you've got this great, awesome, good-looking, tall preacher. What more could they have? Right? You've already got fellowship. You've even got books for sale. You got everything, you know? And so it's only because they were here first and they have this particular infrastructure that we feel intimidated by it. The other issue with it is that we have a tendency to give credit where credit isn't due. Because it's not necessarily the structure of religion that always gives all of these benefits. It's just a human structure that sometimes has different labels. But, you know, some families are really, really, really good at taking care of each other. Some families really, really, really stink at it. Some churches are really, really, really good at taking care of their congregation members. Some churches are horrible at it. So I think humanism is already an alternative. Because I think humanism is the ultimate origin for religion in the first place, as far as the caring and care network that religion creates. I think it was him, and then we'll go to you. Did you have another question, sir? I saw you with your hand up.
I did. I'd like to follow up on your response to the relationship of humanism to present-day Christianity. I don't know whether this is comforting or not, but I believe you just said, in essence, that humanism, contemporary humanism, is to 21st century Christianity as first century Christianity was to Greco-Roman paganism.
Everybody pretend I said that, because that's awesome. Yes, exactly. That's exactly right. I think that is the case. And I think it's the reason why we're struggling to find our footing and to figure out our methods of progress. What's going to work? How are we going to make this happen? Obviously, if you look back at first century Christianity, they had no idea that we would end up where we're at today. They were just doing what they were doing to promote and to organize and to survive. And so we're somewhat in the same vein. What will be fantastic, and here's the other part of this. Right now, where we feel hampered is, it's much like, and I've described it this way before, if you had a scratch-off ticket and at first glance you thought it said you won $1 million. All right, imagine how awesome that would feel, right? But then, the more you study it, it actually says you've only won $1,000. You would be unbelievably depressed that you only won $1,000, right? It'd be $1,000 you didn't have, and it'd be $1,000 that somebody else that never thought they'd won $1 million would be jumping up and down to know that they had won. But because you thought you had $1 million, it was only $1,000. Now you're depressed. Well, that's kind of what we're up against. The deck is somewhat set against us. Because if we have a competitor, and I don't see myself as being I was in this camp and now I'm in that camp. That's why I don't say I lost something. All right? I feel like I graduated above it. I feel like I'm now a citizen of the world. And that I'm actually above the whole argument and the whole debate. But if we do have a competitor, our competitor is saying you won $1 million. All right, because the creator of the universe loves you, and when you die, you get another chance. And we're saying, we really don't know if there's anything deeper down than quantum mechanics. We don't know. Big Bang's awful cool, but we don't really understand it all. And when you die, we're just going to go eat chicken. Right? And so, when you come back with that and say, but you get to live life. You get to be here. You get to experience the universe. You get to, you say all these wonderful, they're like, yeah, but it's not $1 million. But eventually, I think it will be that way. I think eventually there will be generations of people born that they are not deceived into thinking they got $1 million. And they'll love the life out of the $1,000 they did get. Yes, ma'am.
Well, sometimes we're confronted with people that believe in something. My thought is, how come they don't see it? What is going in their mind? They put these fantastic thing, rings to make them thinner or something like that,
yes.
Or any religion. Why?
Yeah.
I don't understand their set of mind.
Yeah. So much of it, it's another reason that I think we hurt ourselves in the secular movement by by not engaging the subject of emotion, other than just simply saying emotion bad, bad emotion. So much of this stuff is just the internal emotional life that people live day in and day out. There's so much about life that we don't sit down and research, that we don't sit down and do an analysis of. We just go by our feelings. We move through life. We're very emotional creatures. And so these people have needs, and they're trying to meet quite literally. We do know from neurology that almost every decision we make, if not every decision we make, is based off of pain and pleasure. Our nervous system is making that decision based off of, will this help me avoid pain, or will this help me gain pleasure? All right? And so it's very easy for people who already live very complicated lives, who aren't practiced in even thinking this way, for them to be, say, very dissatisfied with their body. And they carry that emotional weight with their overweightness all day long. They don't like to see themselves in the mirror. They don't like to be in front of people because more people are witnessing this state of being that they're very unhappy about. And so emotionally, they just gravitate towards anything that can make them feel better for that moment and give them a sense of hope. I mean, that's the reason we talk about in the book, hope after faith. That there actually are ways of hoping that aren't necessarily emotionally driven. But I've seen so much of that. I've got a very, very dear relative right now that his daughter has been battling brain cancer, brain tumors. She's very young. She's just barely out of her teens. And they've been fighting it for years now. And it's overtaking her. Now she's in a wheelchair. She's lost the ability to speak. Very, very, very beautiful, charming young lady. Now completely debilitated. And so, as sad as it is to say, if an evangelist came through their church and said, here's the testimony where everybody who gave $50 and put it, in this hat turned upside down, got their miracle, how in the world would a mom and dad not put $50 in that hat? It's life is hard. Life is complicated. And that's why, referring back to the religion thing, when we get better at explaining our answers about the beauty of life, then I think we'll be more competitive. But right now, people are just desperately looking for answers. Yes, sir.
I think this
I need to be the last one? Okay. Gotcha. Oh, and we got to get out of the room, don't we? I apologize. And y'all got to all buy books.
Yeah.
I had a question, a comment and a question, but I'll just make a comment. I really want to commend you for coming out, because I was one of those folks that you talked about earlier. When I graduated from high school, I had a very powerful religious experience, and I went to seminary, got a bachelor's degree in theology, and when I came out, I said, there's no way I can teach this stuff because I don't believe it. But I think to say some of the things, to kind of echo some of the things you're saying, is that, in church, I'm one of those folks who love church. I love the music, I love the sermons.
Me too.
I just couldn't believe the ideas. And I was talking to a friend the other day, and I said to him, hey, if you could show me how this stuff makes sense, and that I don't have to leave my brain somewhere, I'll do that.
Absolutely.
Right? But I think, to this day, I've never found, and I don't come to these meetings as much, and I'm not really involved in the secular community, but I've never found something that speaks to me so much emotionally, right? Like the music and the church and the singing and the fellowship. There's no corollary outside of that environment. And I think it's very hard to ask people to leave that.
Yes.
And then what do you come to, right? So that's kind of the comment I made. And it's been about 10 years now, and still, the closest thing is the church that I go to, the Unitarian Universalist Church.
Sure.
That is a place where I feel like, I can, I don't have to leave my mind somewhere. I can actually think, but it's not church per se, but it's something. But it's very hard, because there's nothing like that even comes close to that on the emotional.
And I don't know. This may sound pessimistic, but I don't know if it can be replaced. I think that there are some evolutionary triggers there that we've developed, through our evolution, that certain feelings, certain concepts, certain images that mythology creates in our mind triggers certain emotions that we don't have triggered almost nowhere else. I mean, sometimes the closest you can get to it is watching a very larger than life movie in some way. To where you fall in. What's
Visit
that?
the Hayden Planetarium sometime.
Yes, sometimes, yeah, exactly. I mean, there's places that get close and trigger certain sparks of that feeling, but that's what we need to develop. That's what we need to work on. That's what we need to be conscious of. We need to, two things, we need to figure out, can we do that? Can we, in a reason-based environment, learn how to trigger that brain chemistry? And then we have to make sure, can we do it with safeguards? Can we do it in a way that it doesn't just become another religion where people, check out? And so that's the balancing act. But that's what changes the world, is stepping out and trying to, embrace those new frontiers. So I agree with you, and there's one part of me says, I don't know if it can happen, but there's another part of me that is literally investing his life right now in trying to see, is there a way we can do it?